Welcome to Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Sit back, relax, let me tell you a story. Tonight's telling is not of one story, but several. Old bardic threads gather together, the way fires are banked for the night. The stories are meant to wash over you, to give your mind something beautiful to rest against. This is a compilation for listening, for resting, for remembering how it feels to be held by voice. Let's get into it. The Shell Sky of Vaness. In the sun-swept coasts of a crescent-shaped island called Lythea, there lived a girl named Vanessa, known to few as Vanessa. Let's get into it. Her hair was always damp with salt, and her skin bronzed from the reflection of the sea. She was born in a tidal cave cradled by her mother during a high tide, while lightning webbed across the night sky outside the entrance. The villagers took it as an omen, that she was a child of the sea and storm, and so she grew up on the shore, surrounded by driftwood and cloudlight, learning to read the skies and listen to the shells that whispered when held to the ear. Vanessa had a brother named Josh, who was born 3 seasons later. He was a land dweller at heart, and they were close, 2 halves of a curious compass. While he climbed the cliffs to watch the world from above, she dove beneath the waves, searching for the deep pulse that called her every time she dreamt. By age 12, Vanessa had discovered the underwater tunnel just past the coral reef. No one else dared go near it. The elders said it breathed. She said it listened. And on the nights when the stars flickered blue, she would swim to its mouth and hum back the tune it gave her, low, slow, a lullaby with no words. Her adolescence was shaped by the elements. Water taught her patience, wind taught her swiftness, and shells taught her secrets. She began crafting spiraled wind chimes from broken nautilus shells and carved driftwood. When they spun, they sang in tones too precise to be coincidence, harmonics aligned with the moon phases. It was said that Vanessa could hear when a storm was forming 2 oceans away, that her eyes glazed over when the tide whispered of danger. She saved the island from 3 floods by warning the fishermen hours before the clouds gathered, and each time she did, she grew quieter, as if listening required more of her each year. One day she went below, past the coral tunnel, into the hollowed heart of the island itself. She left a single shell on the shoreline, a conch, etched with a spiral so fine it resembled a star map. She didn't return. But that year the weather changed. Lightning no longer struck the bay. The tides fell into rhythm with the breath of the island, and the shells hummed. Vanessa became the echo in the cave, the memory in the tide, the voice in the wind chime. Her brother Josh never stopped listening, and when his time came, he placed a second shell beside hers on the sand, then disappeared beneath the waves, smiling. The island still sings at dusk, 2 voices weaving. The Whisper Grove of Chrys. In a remote forest nestled between 2 rivers, where fog clung to the underbrush like a sleeping spirit, and moss hung in threads from trees older than memory, there lived a woman named Chrys. Let's get into it. The village near the edge of the forest called her Grove Keeper, but she had another name, one given by the trees, Alandra, she who listens. She had been born under a waning crescent moon, in a birthing hut strung with vines and feathers. Her mother was a midwife, her grandmother too, and the moment Chrys opened her eyes, they said she looked as if she were remembering something too large for her body to hold. Her childhood passed in green shadow. She spoke little but listened to everything, to wind in the pines, the calls of the night birds, the soft thrum of earthworms beneath fallen leaves. She learned the language of roots, not from books, but from the hush between seasons. Other children found her odd, sometimes frightening. She did not flinch at spiders or snakes. She whispered to mushrooms and left little offerings in the crooks of trees, seeds, strands of hair, polished stones. Her companion was a large black cat named Shadow, who had been born the same night she was. He followed her everywhere, always quiet, always watching. By adolescence, Chrys had begun healing, not with poultices or tinctures, but with sound. She could hum over a burn and pull the pain into her breath. She could sing a tone that settled a fever, or whisper a rhythm that stopped bleeding. She said it wasn't magic. It was remembering the songs the body already knew. The villagers began to come to her, quietly at first. A woman whose grief had turned her mute. A man who hadn't slept since his son died. A child with tremors. Chrys would take them walking deep into the woods, sometimes for hours, and they would return changed. Some cried for the first time in years, others laughed uncontrollably, as if something had been unknotted. Chrys never took payment. She only asked one thing. Leave something behind that can grow. And so the grove around her house bloomed. Wildflowers, saplings, vines that glowed faintly in the moonlight. The forest seemed to deepen around her, almost folding inward, as if cradling her work. In her middle years, she crafted what she called whisper circles, clearings formed by 7 trees, each one hollowed gently with her hands to serve as a resonance chamber. She placed sacred stones and carved runes in the roots, forming a network of vibration. When she sang, they answered, deep pulsing chords that vibrated the lungs and echoed in dreams. She never married, not because she was alone, but because she had already been chosen by something greater. She said the forest had a name, Gareth, and that it remembered her from before, that she had sung with its breath in another life, one where her body had been made of bark and flame. Chrys's final years were peaceful. Her hair turned silver and her hands became rough as tree bark, but her eyes never dulled. Shadow, still alive somehow, curled beside her at night like a sentinel. One day she walked into the forest with a small satchel and a string of seeds in her palm. She didn't return. When the villagers searched, they found a new clearing perfectly round, at the base of 7 trees shaped like the ones in her whisper circles. In the center was her satchel, empty, and a single message carved into the earth in moss. I've joined the roots. From then on, the forest deepened further. The trees hummed softly at dusk. People reported hearing lullabies in the fog, and those who walked the trails alone sometimes felt a warm hand brush their shoulder, or heard a voice, low and steady, whisper, "Leave something behind that can grow." The whisper on Ashen wind. They called her the wind's echo. Let's get into it. Before she had a name, she had a whisper. It was the sound of wind through stone arches, soft, hollow, persistent. It stirred awake the leaves on trees not native to her soil. It made wolves pause mid-howl, their ears tilting towards something other. The girl was born in a highland stretch known to some as the Veiled Reaches, in a village that barely clung to the rocks. This place was not made for ease. Stone gnarled trails, cold mists, and gales that peeled bark from trees. Her mother died at birth. Her father was a tanner, with ash-stained hands and a voice that cracked from years of working near lye vats. But he held her gently, this baby who didn't cry, only blinked with wide gray eyes, and exhaled in little sighs like breezes coiled in her lungs. She was named Lyra, which meant to listen, in the old mountain tongue. From her first memory, the wind was not just weather, it was companion. As a child, Lyra climbed everything, rocks, trees, abandoned watchtowers. She said the wind showed her where to place her feet. She could scale mossy stones even older boys avoided. It was said that when she was atop the tallest spire, the air went still below, and songbirds gathered gently in nearby branches. She spoke few words, but those she did say often came true. "Storm tomorrow," she'd whisper. It came. "He's lying," she'd mutter. He was. Some feared her, others brought their sick children to her, just to sit near her as she faced into the wind. At age 12, the wind gave her its first gift, a torn piece of red cloth that blew into her hands. It had no scent, but she wept anyway. That night she dreamed of fire, ashes, and hands pulling her from smoke. She woke with a burn on her palm. The healer said it was impossible. The old crone who sold wind charms just nodded. She's remembering something not from here. By her teenage years, the mountain air grew thinner. Lyra grew stranger. She could whistle melodies birds repeated. She'd stare at snow and call it falling silence. One winter she wandered out during a white squall and was missing for a full day. When she returned, she wore feathers woven into her hair and said only, "The high air is full of old truths." She left home at 16, said goodbye to no one. Her father only found a folded scrap of bark with wind glyphs pressed into it, symbols only the sky readers knew, and barely. She walked east, then north, then vanished from known roads. Stories say she entered the Ashen borderlands, a land where winds didn't just move air, but remembered it. Decades passed. Some claim she became a wind priestess in the temple ruins atop Mount Farron. Others say she merged with the wind itself, guiding travelers away from danger. Mountain traders reported hearing her voice in gorges. "Stop now, slide ahead." Everyone who heeded survived. No one saw her again, but on particularly cold mornings, just before dawn, those standing at the cliff's edge sometimes felt fingers brush their cheek, soft, deliberate. And those who whispered her name swore the wind stilled for a heartbeat, as if listening, as if saying, "I remember you too." The Return of Mirelda. Nearly 400 years after the flames took her, the forest grew over the ash, but the tree remained, split, blackened, and still humming with her name. Let's get into it. One autumn, in the chill between dusk and frost, a child came. She was small, barefoot. Her eyes were two shades of storm, one gray, one green. She did not know why she wandered so far, only that her feet felt pulled. She knelt at the tree, and it opened. Not with wood creaking, not with noise, but with memory. Inside that hollow she saw a circle of mushrooms, unchanged by centuries. She touched the bark and felt her spine jolt. Her hand glowed. She heard the voice, not words, a song, the same one sung as she burned, the one that had stopped the wind. She returned every full moon. She didn't speak of it, not even to her mother, who had begun to dream of fires and root work. On her 17th birthday, beneath a blood moon, she stepped into the tree. And this time she did not come out alone. She had waited, not idle. She had become the memory of the forest itself. Owls blinked with her thoughts. The roots carried her grief. And that girl, she wasn't new. She was her. The same soul returned, but this time she had come back not as a healer, but as a judge. The village was the same in its bones, new names, new voices, but the same cruelty lingered in shadows. She walked through the village barefoot and unblinking. She knew who carried secrets. She knew whose hands still burned women in other ways. She knew how to name them. And the forest stood behind her. She is her again, different body, same flame. And this time she is both healer and judge. The moonlight wasn't showing her what to remember. It was showing her what to reclaim. The Grove Walker's Bond. James had always been a quiet child, not because he lacked thoughts, because the world inside him pulsed louder than the one outside. Let's get into it. His companions were Turbo, a fiercely loyal dog with deep amber eyes, and Boots, a sly, shadow-coated cat whose green gaze often seemed to know too much. They were never apart. Turbo ran ahead, scouting paths and clearing brush with his excited leaps. Boots slunk behind, weaving bramble and leaf like a wraith, always alert. James followed, bare feet, heart open, listening to the rustle of bark and breath of stone. His hands brushed ferns as if greeting old friends. In the forest glade known as Whispering Ring, James would sit with his back against the elder tree and listen, not with ears, but with something more ancient. Trees hummed their history to him. Birds stitched songs between the branches that told of storms and rebirth. A single tattoo, shaped like a curling root system, had appeared on his wrists the day he first heard the trees. It pulsed when he touched certain stones, glowed faintly in moonlight, and sometimes shifted, like the roots were growing. James's parents always knew he was different. When the wind carried voices others couldn't hear, they didn't scold him. They asked him what they said. They didn't understand, but they trusted his light. As he grew older, James discovered others in nearby hollows who also heard. The meadow listener, who spoke with bees, and the stone-bound woman, who sang fault lines awake. These people became his second family, each offering him pieces of their wisdom. He collected not things, but truths. It wasn't until the drought came that James' gifts truly bloomed. The river dried, crops withered, and villages whispered of abandoning the valley. James, Turbo, and Boots stood at the cracked riverbed and listened. The tattoo on his wrist flared white. Then he walked upstream beyond old maps, into the uncharted thicket. There, beneath a ring of stones older than story, he pressed his hands to the earth and whispered, a song taught to him by the root elder. Water burst from the rock, clean, singing, and alive. When he returned, soaked and smiling, the villagers did not cheer, they knelt. Not out of worship, but understanding. James was not a child of the valley. He was of the valley. He never left. He and his companions lived among the trees, guiding travelers, healing broken soil, helping those who forgot how to listen. The forest still hums his name. The threads between worlds. Some souls are not bound to one realm. They walk the edges. They stitch the seams. They remember the doors. Let's get into it. Her name was Vara, born during the lunar eclipse beneath a sky that shifted color as she took her first breath. Her eyes were violet, and she never fully fit. At 7, she disappeared for 3 days and returned with stories of forests, where the trees whispered names no humans had heard. At 12, clocks would stop in her presence. By 16, she knew which mirrors led to elsewhere. His name was Heath. He appeared not with fanfare, but in her reflection, first as shadow, then as presence. Finally, a voice.
"You've walked through the thin places," he said, "but you don't know how to stay."
He wasn't human. He wasn't entirely anything. He was what came after forgetting. They met for real at midnight, in a glade when the stars bowed lower than usual. He taught her how to trace the threads, lines of vibration that shimmered between choices. One led to a world of endless dusk, one to a city made of bone and song, one to a garden that dreamed of her name. They walked them all together. They didn't need words, they were words. They didn't fall in love, they folded into resonance. When he touched her, her cells shifted. When she wept, time wept with her. He was not her twin flame. He was her dimensional mirror, the one who held the frequency of her own becoming. And together, they learned that love wasn't an anchor. It was a key. Crossing dimensions has price. Vera began to fray. Pieces of her lingered in other realms. Memories bled together. Smells from other lifetimes lingered in her skin. She began to forget this world's name. But Heath anchored her. He carved a tether into her spine with light and said, "Wherever you go, I will echo." Some people dream of places that never were. Some hear names that never learned, languages that rise in moments of grief or longing. Some turn to a corner and swear they saw another version of themselves vanish. These are the threadwalkers. And Vera still walks, not lost, only expanding. Because some souls aren't meant to choose one world. They are meant to weave them all. The crown beneath the thorn. She was not born into power. She was born beneath it, in the roots, in the dust, amongst the thorns where no crown dared to fall. Let's get into it. Caer Wyn was a realm split between silken palaces and stone-gnawed villages. The nobles draped themselves in velvet and secrets, the commoners in patience and pain. Lady Isolde Maren, though titled, was landless, orphaned, taken in by an aging healer on the edge of the court, a woman whispered to be a witch, but whose touch quieted fevers and stirred truths. Isolde learned quickly, listened more than she spoke. She stitched herbs into royal hems, poured bitter teas into golden goblets, and watched, always watched. He came in blood and thunder, so Rian Calder knighted after saving the king's son from an assassin's blade. But he bore no joy in his rank, only a scar across his ribs and eyes that missed nothing. He noticed her in the shadows, and when he bowed to her, not out of duty, but something older, she felt it in her bones, not a claim, a calling. Isolde's blood carried more than noble lineage. It carried the old right, the power of queens not crowned by gold, but by earth, by ritual, by sacrifice. Her line had been hidden, broken, burned from the scrolls, until now, and something ancient began to wake. He did not woo her, he trained with her, fought beside her, trusted her hands to pull out arrows and press herbs into open wounds. He didn't speak of love, he called her truth. She didn't cry when he went to war. She called wind through her hands and whispered a spell only her bloodline remembered. He returned broken, but alive. And when he woke, she was there. When the crown turned on her, afraid, always, of power they didn't give, she did not run. She walked into the hall of judgment wrapped in black and spoke a name no one living remembered. The stone floor cracked.
the royal seal burned, and every raven in the courtyard screamed at once. Isolde was not crowned, but the land bent to her. The rivers cleared, the storms gentled. The people whispered, not queen, but keeper. And Rian, he followed, not behind her, beside her, sword in hand and vow in heart, because some kingdoms are not built with gold, but with names carved in truth and blood that remembers.
The sand remembers her name. The gods did not speak her name, they sang it into stone. Let's get into it. She was born beneath the red sun, skin kissed by copper light, eyes darker than onyx. Her name was Neferari, a daughter of the house of scribes, not royal, not priestly, but marked. She felt the statues watch her when others passed unseen. She heard whispers in temples no one else entered. And when she touched papyrus, the ink moved beneath her fingers. The elders grew quiet around her. The sand warmed beneath her feet. Something ancient was stirring. Sahure was a prince, but not a golden one. He lived between chambers, son of a concubine dismissed by the court. His intellect cut sharper than any blade, his presence a calm flame. He was not loved by power, but power loved him. Neferari met him by chance in the temple of Thoth, both reaching for the same scroll. Their hands touched, and the torchlight flared blue. She was not trained in the priesthood, but her voice changed the tone of ritual drums. She could summon wind with a sigh. Sahure brought her secret texts, glyphs carved on forbidden stone, writings that spoke of a first tongue, a language of vibration that could awaken memory in objects. She tried it once, and a statue of Bastet turned its head. They began to meet in catacombs, in chambers sealed to others. Their breath carried spells now, their touch, invocation. And love became sacred work. The high priest saw them, not their meetings, but their radiance. He knew that light. He had felt it once, long ago, before fear stripped it from him. He ordered her watched. Sahure plotted escape, but the gods had already chosen. On the night of the blue moon, a rare celestial event revered for its gateway between realms, Neferari stood at the base of the unfinished obelisk. Her voice rose in a chant she did not learn. The sand lifted, the stars pulsed, and her body arched, a light from spine to skull. She did not rise into divinity. She remembered she already was. The records say Neferari vanished, that Sahure disappeared from court weeks later. But in the desert, among the dunes beyond reach, travelers still speak of a woman veiled in gold, eyes glowing, standing beside a man with a voice that calms storms. They say, if you whisper her name into the wind, the sand will whisper it back, because some names are not lost, they are buried, until the world is ready to remember. The roots of his roar. He did not lead with fists, he led with presence, a stillness so deep it shook the air when he finally moved. Let's get into it. Born beneath an ancient yew said to mark the resting place of kings, Cassian Thornheart was the only child in a village that feared its own woods. He wandered anyway. By the time he was 5, the trees whispered his name. By 10, the wolves watched over his sleep. By 14, he stood between a charging boar and a weeping girl, and the boar bowed its head. Cassian did not fight to prove himself. He fought when silence failed. His strength was not brute force, it was clarity. A gaze that unsettled tyrants, a word that stilled chaos. By 17, chieftains sought his counsel, elders deferred, even the arrogant paused, not because he demanded it, but because his soul carried weight, and it bent the air. He met her beneath a storm-split oak, a Lyra, sharp as frost and twice as distant, sword drawn and eyes daring him to speak. He said nothing, but offered her water. And when her shoulders finally fell, he said just one thing. "You are not alone." They built a bond not of fire but of iron, strong, quiet, unshakable. When the raiders came, Cassian did not summon an army. He stood alone in the pass, not to win, to warn. 3 turned back. The rest he felled like trees in a gale, graceful, focused, unrelenting. But it was a Lyra at his side who reminded the world that strength is not about dominance. It's about choice. Cassian planted no flags. He built no throne. He left only a grove where the earth hums louder than wind, and wild creatures gather at twilight. They say if you step into the clearing with a lie in your heart, the ground won't hold you. But if you enter with truth and a need, you'll find a man waiting, tall, silent, and strong enough to carry what you can't, until you can. The Blade and the Bloom. Her name was never written in the king's ledger, but her deeds were carved in the bark of trees, etched in storm-scored stone, and whispered through generations in the language of the wind. Let's get into it. She was born in a thatched roundhouse, at the edge of the moor where the foxes ran and the sky hung low. Brandy Bray was not raised to hold a sword. Her mother spun wool, her father carved flutes from yew. But when raiders came one spring coated in rust and fire, Brandy was the only one who stood in their path. She was 13. She had no blade, only a branch. She broke the leader's jaw with it, and the forest howled her name for 3 days. A wandering hedge knight found her the next year, catching her sparring with her own shadow at dusk. He offered her coin. She declined. He offered her lessons. She agreed, on the condition he speak only truth and never try to tame her. He laughed, but he kept his word. By 17, she could strike with both hands, read 4 languages, and hear the weight of a lie before it was spoken. They called her the Bloom Blade, for wherever she fought, the land never died. Crops did not fail, wells stayed full, bees returned. It was whispered that her bloodline traced back to the forest gods, old as stone and wild as storm. She never claimed it, but her sword, wrought of ash and starlight, sang when drawn, and her cloak bore no crest, only a sprig of heather. When the war came, she did not kneel before any king. She fought for villagers, for orphans, for the land itself. And when generals tried to bend her strategy, she gave them truth. I fight where I am needed, not where I am ordered. Soldiers left their posts to follow her, not out of loyalty, out of belief. At Brackenfell Pass, she stood against a warlord who had never lost. Her arm was broken, her leg slick with blood. Still she rose and whispered to the wind. The trees shuddered, and in that breath the warlord's blade snapped in his grip. He fled, and the war was over before dawn. Brandy vanished after the peace. Some say she married a healer and tended bees in the north. Others say she walked into the forest one night and was never seen again. But on Midsummer's Eve, if you listen beneath the heather bloom, you might hear a blade being drawn without fear, because her story was never just one war. It was one of balance, of knowing when to strike and when to let the world bloom. And that's it for today. Thank you for joining me for Echoes of My Imagination. My name is Tracy Lee. Don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, and share, and I will catch you next time.